up to the 30, the 20, 10, 5, Torrey Horton back to the end zone.
48-yard play. Guess who? Body up the middle, making another move to the outside. 15, 10, end zone again.
Keeps it. Nice move by Brown. He's got space. He's got 6. 35-yard touchdown for Byron Brown. A record-setting night for the South Florida quarterback.
Down so far, a little bit of a high snap. Genty right up the middle. Genty has room. Ashton Genty, give him 6.
Second and long. Lagar tries to fit it in. Runnels, it does. Runnels stays up. The Suns offense 4-3 wins. Incredible effort for Runnels.
The G5 Hive. All G5, all the time.
Welcome to the G5 Hive Live, and we are excited to bring you the G5 college football coverage that you love each and every week. I am Luke Probasco. I'm joined by my co-host, Justice, over here. Always get confused on my directions on the camera. If you are watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching us on X, please give us a follow, a like, a retweet. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. All right, let's get into our G5 Hive 2020 guys. So, got to make sure that we talk about this. Our 2020 guys, we're going to start at the quarterbacks. These are guys that are in the top 20 in the whole G5 in pass attempts and passing yardage. So to make this list, you have to be the top 20, hence 2020. Top 20 pass attempts, top 20 passing yards. Quarterbacks. Number 1, Chandler Morris, North Texas. He's first in the G5 in passing yards per game with 333. He's first in passing touchdowns with 20. He leads the G5 in big time throws with 17. He's tied for last of these 2020 guys in turnover worthy plays with 7. Devin Dampier comes in at number 2, New Mexico, tied for last of the 2020 guys with 7 passing touchdowns. He does his damage on the ground where he he's first in the rushing attempts per game of the 2020 guys with 9 rushes per game. He's got 63 yards per game, which is the most rushing yards of these 2020 guys. Then he's third in the G5 in big time throws with 15. So Devin Dampier coming in at number 2. Jordan McLeod, Texas State at 3. Second in passing touchdowns with a 19. And if you remember, I said Chandler Morris was at first with 20. So Jordan McLeod right on his tail. He has the least amount of pressures per game of these 2020 guys with 6.8 pressures per game. Seth Hennigan, Memphis. He has the second most completions per game with 25.6. You can't have 0.6 in a game, so we'll just say 25. But decimals matter in the ranking. So he has that 25.6 is second in the G5. He's fifth in the G5 in big time throws. He's tied for last of the 2020 guys in turnover-worthy plays with 7. Spencer Petras, Utah State, coming in there at number 5, second in the G5 in passing yards per game with 317, just lighting the world on fire. Jalen Royals loving it too. He completes the most passes per game in the G5 with 26. He's tied for last of the 2020 guys in turnover-worthy plays, just like Seth Hennigan with 7. So not too many turnover-worthy throws, thrown for a lot of yards, completes a lot of them. Spencer Petras, just like we all thought coming into the season. Then we got Joey Aguilar, App State. He leads the G. This is probably the most sneaky one on the 2020 list. Number 6. We've always said Aguilar just like he doesn't do anything like spectacular. He's just fine all over. He leads the G5 in attempts per game with 42. He leads the G5 in turnover-worthy plays with 16. Jake Garcia finally not so number 1 on this list. But so yeah, he is tied with Jake Garcia. Caden Simonza, Ball State. He is the last of the 2020 guys in passing yards per game with 229. He's second to last of the 2020 guys in time to throw with 2.31 seconds. And he's also last of these 2020 guys in big time throws. But he's thrown for a fair amount of yardage there with that 229, keeping the ball and scoring touchdowns. Number 8, Mikey Keene, Fresno State, second to last of the 2020 guys in rushing attempts with 1.8 per game. Christian Vayer, Georgia State, last of the 2020 guys in rushing attempts with 1.6, just a little bit under Mikey Keene. He has the least amount of time to throw of the 2020 guys with 2.31 seconds, and he's tied for last of the 2020 guys in turnover-worthy plays with 7. There's a couple of them there with 7. Braden Shager, Hawaii, he has the most time to throw of the 2020 guys with 2.9 seconds, the most pressures per game in the G5 with 16.8 per game. Nicholas Vadiato, Middle Tennessee, tied for last of the 2020 guys with 7 passing touchdowns. Brett Gabbert, Miami of Ohio, he's last of the 2020 guys in attempts per game with 32. He's also last of the 2020 guys in completions per game with 17.8. However, he's second amongst the 2020 guys in average depth of target, or ADOT, with 11.1. And Emmett Brown, if he doesn't get the start, if he doesn't play a majority of the game, if he doesn't play for more than a half, I'm probably going to omit him next week. He was at number 2 last week, and just kind of what's going on, that fluctuation, I've dropped him down here. But Emmett Brown of San Jose State, third in the G5 in passing touchdowns with 16. And like, he might not play. It's wild. First of the 2020 guys in ADOT with 12.6. Running backs, just like the 2020 for quarterbacks, we've got criteria. 2020. So they're top 20 in total touches. That's rushing attempts and receiving or receptions. And then top 20 in total yards. 2020 guys. Here we go. Ashton Jeanty, Boise State, most yards per game in the G5 with 213.5. Tied for last of the 2020 guys in receptions per game with 1.3. I think I said 1.5 earlier. 1.3. He's first in touchdowns in the G5 with 17.
And he's left a lot of touchdowns on the table. Like, he could have a lot more touchdowns. And he hasn't always been playing full games either.
Number 2, Marquez Cooper, San Diego State, most touches per game in the G5 with 26.8 per game. Third in yards per game in the G5 with 121.3. Braden Sloan, Ball State, he's the last of the 2020 guys in rushing yards per game with 69.6 yards. He's 6th, however, in the G5 in receptions per game with 3.1, tied for last of the 2020 guys in forced missed tackles with 14. Braden Sloan doing a lot more out of the receiving, and he's kind of like this hybrid mix. He can kind of give you both. Mekhi Hughes, Tulane, 3rd in the G5 in rushing attempts per game with 18. He's 4th in the G5 in rushing yardage per game, right at the century mark, 100. Ontario Brown, if he continues to miss games, I will probably also omit him going forward. But Ontario Brown, NIU, 4th in yards per game in the G5 with 121, tied for last of the 2020 guys in touchdowns with 2. Dean Connors, Rice, last of the 2020 guys in touches per game with 16.2. However, he is first in the G5 in receptions per game with 5.6. Second in the G5 in receiving yards per game with 41.3. So him and Braden Sloan, kind of the same type. Mario Anderson, Memphis, he's getting the least amount of rushing attempts of these 2020 guys with 13.6. However, he's second in the G5 in receptions per game with 4. Third in the G5 in touchdowns with 8. If you remember, Jeanty's sitting there at 17, and Anderson's there at 3rd with 8. Rasul Faison, Utah State, 4th in the G5 in rushing attempts per game with 17.8. Quentin Cooley, Liberty, 3rd in the G5 in rushing yards per game with 109, but he is giving you 0 in the receiving game, averaging let me do the math, 0 yards per game for the Flames. Anthony Tyus, Ohio, 7th in the G5 in rushing yards per game with 95.8. He's tied for last of these 2020 guys in receptions per game with 1.3. Making his debut on the 2020 list is our freshman of the week, Ahmad Hardy, Louisiana. He's got the least amount of yards of these 2020 guys with 93.5. He is second in the G5 and missed tackles, 4th with 44. So he's making his way up there. I'm not sure if he's going to catch Ashton Genty. I have to look up where Ashton is real quick. Give me a quick second. Filibuster.
Hardy is playing great for a true freshman. Especially someone like you didn't necessarily expect to carry the load. I think before the season we would have told you it was Hunter Smith and Azario Smith, but Ahmad Hardy kind of busted out week 1, and like you always say, Luke, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, baby.
Yeah. So Ashton Genty missed tackles, 4th, 54. Ahmad Hardy at 44. So hard to catch, but doing great. Avery Morrow also makes the list this week. First time on the list. Colorado State, 6th in the G5 in rushing yards per game with 96.6. However, he's tied for the last of the 2020 guys in forced missed tackles with 14. Ismail Mahdi, Texas State, he's tied for the last of the 2020 guys in touchdowns with 2. He's just
they share the ball a lot.
Yeah, he's just been used kind of between the 20s. Very effective. Friend of the podcast, we had him on in the wintertime. We're all about Ismail Mahdi, but yeah, on the list here. But I mean, top 13 in the G5, not bad. Let's move over to the wide receivers. Wide receivers here, I want to mention Nash, Ashlock, Royals, Robinson, and Wysong, all with double-digit targets per game. All guys that we're going to cover here are averaging 75-plus yards per game. So pretty good group here. Nick Nash, San Jose State, he's the only guy in the G5 averaging double-digit receptions per game to go along with those targets per game. He's averaging 10.3 receptions per game, most yards per game in the G5 with 134.3, most touchdowns in the G5 with 10.
Just going to mention for the receivers, it's top 20 in targets and top 20 in receiving yards in the G5.
And thanks for saving me. I did the great for the first 2. Drop the ball. I would not make a good wide receiver as I drop the ball here. But yeah, those top 20s, they have to meet both criteria to make this list. Jalen Royals, Utah State. He's second in the G5 in receptions per game with 7.3. Second in the G5 in yards per game with 108.5. Ophelia Ashlock, Hawaii, tied for third in the G5 in receptions per game with 7.2. He is last amongst this group in the 2020 guys in yards per game with 77.16. Second to last of this group in touchdowns with 4. Tied for last of the 2020 guys in yak per reception with 3.8. So great if you play fantasy football stuff. He's a great floor guy. He's going to get you to PPR points. Caden Robinson, again, App State is kind of weird because we kind of thought they would be just blowing teams out. We thought that this team could represent the G5 in the playoffs, but Caden Robinson just doesn't have the touchdowns. He's third to last in the 2020 guys in yak per reception with 3.9, but he's up like I said, like all of these guys are getting double-digit targets and they're getting more than 75 yards per game. Like he is killing it, and he's a top 5, technically I guess top 4 wide receiver in the G5. Once touchdown, I'm like it's just like the floodgates are going to open.
The App State offensive line is not good, and the App State defense is not good, and that's not a good recipe to win games.
Then we got Luke Wysong there at number 5. He just does like everything pretty good for New Mexico. There's nothing that like when you look through the stats that he's at the top of the list for. There's nothing he's at the bottom of the list for. He's just like working and grooving right in the middle. Luke Weiss on there at number 5. Number 6, bumped him up a little bit. Ricky White, UNLV, ever since they made the switch to Williams there at quarterback. He's been lighting it up. He's second in the G5 in touchdowns with 8. I don't know how many he had prior to his arrival. It was not very
a lot.
Dante Wright, Temple, tied for 3rd in the G5 in receptions per game with 7.2. He's second to last of these 2020 guys in touchdowns with 4, and he's last of the 2020 guys in ADOT with 8.1. Camden Benjamin comes in at number 8. And for Tulsa, second to last of the 2020 guys in yards per game with 78.5. Corey Rucker, Arkansas State, third to last of the 2020 guys in yards per game with 78.8. We've got Krishan, Big Play, McCray, Kent State tied for 3rd in the G5 in touchdowns with 7. A lot of that coming here lately. He's second in these 2020 guys in ADOT average depth of target with 15.5 yards. Jamal Pritchett coming in at number 11, South Alabama, third of these 2020 guys in yak per reception or yards after the catch with 7.8 yards. Ted Hurst comes in at number 12, Georgia State, last amongst the 2020 guys in receptions per game with 5. He has the highest ADOT of the 2020 guys with 19.1. He's tied for last of these 2020 guys in yak per reception with 3.8. Devontae Ross Troy, the least amount of targets per game of these 2020 guys with 8.3. Still a great number. Tied for 3rd in the G5 in touchdowns with 7, and first in of the 2020 guys in yak per reception with 8.8. So he's scoring touchdowns. He's making guys miss when he gets the ball. But
his numbers are directly impacted if whether Goose Crowder's playing or not.
Number 14 and last on the wide receiver list is Amari Kelly, Middle Tennessee. 3rd in the G5 in yards per game with 94.8. But however, he is last amongst the 2020 guys in touchdowns with 3. So we'll see how he bounces back or how he does against Kennesaw State this week. Moving over to our tight ends, 2020. We do the top 20, but we don't do near as many because they're just not as impactful. But you have to be in the top 20 in targets at the tight end position, and you have to be in the top 20 receiving yards. And then if you matched both of those, you made the top 20, or you made the 2020 list, but we only do the top 5. I'm just going to kind of run through some stats. The top 4 are the same as last week. We've got Harold Fannin Jr., Bowling Green. He's the only tight end in the G5 to be averaging double-digit targets per game at 10. He leads the G5 in touchdowns with 5. He has the most receptions per game with 8.3, the most yards per game with 117 yards. Tanner Kozoil, number 2, Ball State, second in targets per game in the G5 with 9.8. He's got 7.6 receptions per game and 72.5 yards per game. Holden Willis there at number 3 for Middle Tennessee. He is averaging 6.5 targets, 4.3 receptions, and 65.5 yards per game. Dorian Fleming, Georgia State, at number 4, averaging 6.2 targets, 4.2 receptions, 46.8 yards. And new to the list this week, number 5, Terrence Carter, Louisiana, averaging 4.5 targets per game, 3.6 receptions per game, and 53 yards per game.
One interesting thing about Harold Fannin Jr., if you lumped him in with the receivers, he'd be number 3 in targets and number 2 in receiving yards per game. So he'd be a top 3 receiver, and he plays tight end. He had a bit of a down week this past week, but up until this past week, he was killing it each and every week, man. He's one of the best, if not the best, tight end in all of college football. I hope he wins the Tight End of the Year award, and I hope it does not go to Penn State's Tyler Warren, who I think James Franklin is trying to pad his stats so he wins that award. But man, Harold Fannin Harold Fannin Jr., quite a talent there for Bowling Green. All right, let's move over to the defensive side of things. And for our 2020 guys for defense, it's a little bit different. We keep the same moniker, 2020 guys, but we're only looking at one particular stat, and we're only looking at the top 5. And so for defensive ends and defensive tackles, we'll get to in a minute. That is the havoc rate. Havoc rate, something that we calculate. It looks at sacks, quarterback pressures, tackles for loss, stops on 3rd and 4th down, etc. And number one, the only guy that has made this top 5 list each and every week, defensive end Mike Green from Marshall, havoc rate of 18%. He ranks 2nd in sacks among the G5 with 9 sacks. Number 2 is defensive end Bradley Weaver from Ohio, havoc rate of 17%. He ranks 3rd in total quarterback pressures with 26. Coming in at number 3, Elijah Robinson from Hawaii. He had a good game against Boise. He was wreaking havoc on Maddox Madsen. He has a havoc rate of 15%. He ranks 5th among the defensive line in tackles per game with 4.3. Number 4, this guy is having a phenomenal year for San Diego State. Defensive end Trey White, havoc rate of 14%, and he ranks 1st in sacks with 11. Rounding out our top 5 is defensive end Eric O'Neill, James Madison, havoc rate of 14% as well. It has a rush win rate of 13.4%. One thing I've noticed a lot looking at stats for James Madison this year is they rotate that defensive line a little bit more than they have in the past in terms of snaps. But when Eric O'Neill is in there, he is getting it done for them. All right, let's move over to defensive tackles. Once again, same thing as defensive ends. It's havoc rate. So it's quarterback pressures, sacks, tackles for loss, 3rd and 4th down stops. Number 1 is defensive tackle Darius Alexander from Toledo, havoc rate of 11%. He ranks 3rd in quarterback pressures with 13. Number 2, another lineman from James Madison, defensive tackle Chris Fitzgerald, also a havoc rate of 11%, ranks 2nd in stops. That's 3rd and 4th down stops with 15. Number 3, defensive tackle Peyton Zadroik from Air Force. A little love for the academy there. Also with a havoc rate of 11%. And he ranks 5th in total pressures among defensive tackles with 12. Coming in at number 4, defensive tackle Deonta Johnson from East Carolina. Havoc rate of 11%. Ranks 1st among defensive tackles and tackles for loss with 5. And rounding out our defensive tackles at number 5, Anthony Hawkins, Bowling Green, ranks 2nd among D tackles and sacks with 4, with a havoc rate also of 11%. Those are the D tackles that are getting it done in the G5. Moving over to linebackers, we do have a newcomer this week, and we have 2 sets of teammates, which I just think is freaking pretty impressive. Number 1, Sean Dolak, Buffalo, averaging 12.3 tackles per game, has the unbelievable solo tackle rate of 89%, and his missed tackle rate is 3.9%. He is just a tackling machine, and we've seen him get it done in coverage too. We saw him with a big interception, I believe, in that game against Northern Illinois to send that game to overtime and get that win. Number 2, my player of the week, Travion Barnes, Florida International, averaging 10.8 tackles per game, and he has 8 total quarterback pressures on the season. So not only is he getting tackles, he's also getting pressure on the opposing team's quarterback. Number 3, Colin Ramos, Navy. Some more love for our academies. Colin is averaging 10.8 tackles per game. He has 8 total quarterback pressures on the season. Coming in at number 4, Sean Dolak's teammate, Red Murdoch, averaging 10.2 tackles per game, and he ranks 3rd among linebackers in sacks with 3. And then rounding out our top 5, Colin Ramos's teammate, first time on the list, Kyle Jacob from Navy, averaging 9.2 tackles per game, and he also has a very low missed tackle rate of 6.1%. Those are your tackling machines from the G5. All right, let's move over to the defensive backs. We're going to start with cornerbacks, and the cornerbacks and safeties are both ranked by adjusted net yards per coverage snap. It's a calculation that uses, what happens when they're targeted. How does the receiver do? It also subtracts things such as interceptions and interception return yards and pass breakups. So these are the guys that are getting it done in terms of coverage. Number one, another JMU guy, Terrence Spence, adjusted net yards against of negative 0.12. To give you guys some perspective, like you look at the top guys in the NFL, their numbers like 3 or slightly less than 3. And Terrence Spencer has a negative number there with negative 0.12. He is ranked first in interceptions among cornerbacks with 4. Number 2, we've talked about him a lot. Matthew McDoom, Coastal Carolina. McDoom Island, as Coach called it when we previewed Coastal Carolina. Adjusted net yards against of 0.01. And he has a quarterback rating against of 12.10. He is truly living up to the McDoom Island moniker. Number 3, Torrey Richardson from Temple. Adjusted net yards against also of 0.01. And he has a quarterback rating against of 21.7. Coming in at number 4, Dante Joyner from Arkansas State. Adjusted net yards against of 0.09. And he ranks 5th in interceptions among cornerbacks with 2. And rounding out our top 5, Cam Lockridge, Fresno State. Adjusted net yards against of 0.18. And he ranks 3rd in pass breakups with 6. Moving over to the safeties, again, same criteria, adjusted net yards against per coverage snap. Number 1 is safety Jerron Manning from Old Dominion. He is number 1 in all of college football in the adjusted net yards against. He has an adjusted net yards against of negative 0.73. He ranks 2nd in interceptions, and not only can he cover, he gets it done in run support as well, averaging 6.33 tackles per game. I get to see this guy play each and every week. He is a phenomenal talent. I'm very glad Old Dominion got him. I just hope Old Dominion is able to hold on to him because, man, he is a player. Coming in at number 2, safety Tyrone Lewis Jr. from Louisiana. Adjusted net yards against of negative 0.41 and has a quarterback rating against of 1.20. Coming in at number 3, safety Zechariah Poyser, Jacksonville State. Adjusted net yard against of negative 0.41. He ranks 2nd in interceptions with 3, and he's averaging 5.6 tackles per game. Coming in at number 4, another JMU guy, safety Jacob Thomas. Adjusted net yards against of negative 0.37 and has a quarterback rating against of 0.80. Rounding us out, this guy was Luke's player of the week, I believe, last week, or maybe it was the week before. Caleb Weaver, safety Sam Houston, adjusted net yards against of negative 0.36, ranks 2nd in interceptions with 3, and he's averaging 6.33 tackles per game. And that's going to do it for our G5 Hive 2020 players.
So that is going to do it for us this week. We've got come back and join us next week as we discuss what happened in week 8, as well as look forward to week 9 of the 2024 season, as well as bring you up to date on all the latest news and happenings in the world of G5 college football. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're watching us on X, please give us a retweet, a like, and a follow. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe. Leave those 5-star rating and reviews. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
Go!